That we are going to talk a little bit about what Francis and Baba do for us that help to transform us. So it is a little bit of personal mixed in. It doesn't mean that it's the path that we're preaching to you. It doesn't mean any of that. We want to make that perfectly clear. This is about our personal journey, and we're so grateful to Baba for bringing St. Francis in. And Paul will probably play the reverse. He's grateful that St. Francis brought Baba in, because I was with Baba first, except for what that 15-year-old reading on the wall. It was the first line of the famous St. Francis prayer, "Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace." The whole prayer was there, but when I read the first line, it was like it was highlighted, and it was like an arrow in my heart. And I just said, if I could just do this in my life would feel complete. But little did I know, as I was saying before, when everything was shut off here, that in wisdom we found that, Paul and I have found in our age that looking back on things, what a beautiful tapestry Baba weaves for each and every one of us as individuals. That the threads that we begin to pick up, even that first thread of that recognition, just do that. Because in my older years now, golden age years, I found that spending my time with St. Francis in Assisi and around Franciscans and working with the Franciscans, that it's kind of made me, because I needed that, to have a little bit more, be more active in charity and be more active in being an awareness of who I am and what I do. One of the things that I've really learned in hindsight is that to be a good Franciscan, that St. Francis was a stellar example of a great Baba lover. He was the stellar example. And Anne also is pretty familiar with St. Francis and been to Assisi, so she may want to chime in on some of these things. Anyway, I think it's a beautiful thing, and one of the things that brings home to me is my gratitude when I look back and see how unique all of our journeys are, and it brings gratitude to my heart to be a Franciscan. So I'm going to leave it at that so we don't get too long here, okay? And I'm going to let Paul give you a brief on how he ended up with St. Francis, and we'll come back to talk a little bit about the biography of St. Francis and about his life and the breakdown of what he and I have learned personally that helped our lives. And then later on we'll go to Baba's work in Assisi and what happened at the cave in Assisi.
My story is a little more dynamic and critical than James. How I came to Francis. Back in 1999, I went through a very tough divorce. My wife divorced me. My children didn't want to see me anymore, and they wouldn't allow me to see my 9 grandchildren. So I was really depressed, very depressed. I was at the bottom of the barrel. And I thought the only way out was to I was a New York City detective for 22 years, and I took my gun out, and I put the gun in my mouth, and I pulled back the hammer, and I was 1 second away from ending it. And something told me to make a phone call to a very good friend of mine. He was a deacon and an ex-police officer. And I said, I told him what I just told you, and he said, I need you to go see Father Blaine, the Franciscan priest up in the friary in Staten Island. He says, you have to go there, see him, he will help you. I said, all right, the last resort. I called up, made an appointment. This thing happened on Saturday. On Tuesday, I had the appointment with Father Blaine. I walked into the friary. They put me in a lounge area, and I'm sitting on a couch, and Father Blaine walked into the room, coming out of the door here, and I saw Jesus Christ. He had an aura around him that just mesmerized me, and I couldn't speak, and he several times said, are you Paul? And I didn't answer, I just kept staring at him. And then he finally said, are you Paul? And I came out of it. I said, yes, I am. He says, okay, what's happening with you? And I told him what happened, what I just told you. He said, fine. I want you to come here every Tuesday night. We have Bible reading, and we take one sentence out of the Bible, and we reflect on it and talk about it. It's okay. Then he said to me, long story short, I joined a whole bunch of things. I helped them out. On weekends, I went to the friary to do all the different groups that used to come in, and I took care of the friary on the weekends. Then he says, I think it's time for you to look into becoming a Franciscan. I didn't know anything about Franciscans, but if this guy told me to go on the roof and jump off, I would have done it. So I decided I was going to look into becoming a Franciscan, which I did. That was in 2001 that I became a Franciscan, or I joined the Franciscans. Subsequently, I didn't realize, but joining the Franciscan was the transition for me to becoming a Baba lover, because it coincided so perfectly when I met Jen and she brought me to the center here, and I was just blown away. What happened to me at the center, I think most of you know about that story. When I touched the stone from his old crib, everything changed. My whole life changed. Anyway, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. So that was my transition from becoming a Franciscan, and eventually I moved down here, I found the Franciscans, and they found me. I didn't know there were Franciscans here. I went to church on a Sunday at 11 o'clock, read the brochure, and it said, Franciscans are meeting after the 11 o'clock Mass. I said, this is divine intervention, because I didn't even know there were Franciscans here. I went in, and 3 women met me and says, are you inquiring about the Franciscans? I said, sort of. And they said, well, what do you mean sort of? I said, well, I was a Franciscan up in New York. And the one woman says, are you professed? Now, professed is a 2-year program you have to go through to get this, the Tau Cross of St. Francis. I said, yes, I'm professed. And the 3 of them jumped on me, hugging me, kissing me. And my first thought was, that's not the way they greeted me in New York. But anyway, they said, we need 5 Franciscans professed to make a fraternity. I was number 5. So again, divine intervention. And we've had this fraternity since then, which was in 2009. And now the fraternity is growing like crazy. And I was the minister, I'm now the vice minister, and we're doing wonderful things, and Jen is really helping me with it. That's my story here.
So I'd like to share with you a little bit about some things that Mayor Baba said about St. Francis, to just give you an idea. There's a lot in Lord Mayor about Baba, quoting St. Francis, and it's clear that he talked about St. Francis and held him in high regard as an example, even to his own Mandali many times. But here are a few things I want to share with you right out of Lord Mayor that Mayor Baba actually said. Too much? Thank you. Thank you. Is that better?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it's better for
Yeah.
me. Thank you.
Yeah, right.
Thank you, Baba. So Baba said of St. Francis that he was the only one of the very few saints in the West to become a perfect master. He said Francis's love, like Mira's love for Krishna, excelled that of Peter the Rock, because Francis never met Jesus, and so his love and longing were much greater. Baba also said of St. Francis in a letter to Dilly Dion in 1938, as you know, I need none of you. I can work my will independently, but I have chosen for my own reasons a few to help me in that work. But these few need a love and faith as rare as that of St. Francis of Assisi. Let the same love of his for Christ be your goal, and love me as he loved his master. So, and of course, the big thing that Baba said about Francis is, if you have the love for me that St. Francis has for Jesus, not only will you realize me, but you'll please me. And so for me as a Baba lover, what better example was there for me to follow? Because who would not want to just do right by Baba and be a good follower of Baba and learn our way, find our way, but to please him, and to please him is sort of the cherry on the top. Right, and so next what we'd like to do is give you a very brief biography of this wonderful saint that clearly Baba also stated that he was his favorite male saint. So I'm going to have Paul do a very brief biography of Francis's life, and we're going to take some of the other parts of Francis's life and talk a little bit about how it helped us as individuals and a couple.
Does anyone know what Francis's real name is? Francis is not his name.
Giovanni something.
Right. His real name is Giovanni di Pietro Bonadone. His father named him Francis because he was a clothing merchant and dealt mostly with France, and he felt that would help his business if he named his son Francis. But he wasn't Francis. He called him Francis, and everybody ever since has been calling him Francis. Anyway, he was born in 1181 and died in 1224. Only lived 45 years, but made a perfect master anyway. But still made a perfect master. He died on October 3rd. We have a Trinitas, a special ceremony on every October 3rd, the Franciscans. He received his stigmata in 1224. You know what the stigmata is?
Do y'all know what the stigmata is?
That's towards the end of his life.
Okay.
The stigmata was towards the end of his life.
Right, 2 years before he died. All right?
Explain what it is, honey. Dennis.
The stigmata is, he received the wounds of Jesus Christ. His hands, his side, and his feet. St. Clair constantly had to take care of those wounds after he received them. He's responsible for making the first nativity. Nobody knew that. I didn't even know that.
In Gubbio, right?
Huh?
Wasn't it in Gubbio? No, that was...
No. The fresco, which we got to see this because it's right near Assisi. The fresco at the entrance of the Benedictine Abbey in Subacchio is a true depiction of what Francis looks like. We had a picture, it's in a book, but I want to see that. He was canonized 2 years after his death by Pope Gregory IX in 1228. Francis's order was approved by Pope Innocent III in 1210, which was a year after he had visited the Pope and said that he wanted to have this order. And the Pope, within a year, gave him the right to start this order. He then founded the Poor Clare Sisters at the same time, and then he founded the Order of the Brothers and Sisters of Penance, which is now called the Third Order of the Franciscans, which is what I am. That's it.
So I'm going to have Paul go on and tell us a little bit more because I'd like to delve in just very briefly because it has to do with some things we've learned from it. Very briefly, the life as a young man for Francis and his aspiration to become a knight. And the interesting thing, as Paul explained, he was a bit of a wild man. I guess none of us can relate to that, right, in our youth? Okay. So
She was born in the 60s, so that should tell you what she is.
So as you can see, as we move along, one of the great things about, for us with being with St. Francis, is that when we take apart even the life of a great saint such as this, that we've been able to see threads of even our own life, which has helped us to lighten up a little bit about our own journey. Because let me tell you, this man was not without drama either. So let him tell you that part. Go ahead.
Okay, and Francis was striving to become a knight, mainly because his father wanted him to. Yeah?
No, he's fine.
Is he okay?
Yeah, I think it's good. And which it had a lot of prestige if you became a knight. And but he was a party animal and a womanizer in his youth. So he was like any young man. I'll attest to that. He went to war with Perugia in 1202, and he was captured a short time thereafter and spent a year in jail. It was believed that he had some kind of an awakening that took place in jail. But we don't have any documentation of that, but something happened there. His father, being a rich merchant, paid for his release and got him released from Perugia. However, upon his return, he had no desire to go back into war or become a knight. So again, something was awakening in him. Francis was ostracized by his friends and especially by his father. And this change became about because somehow the spirit was awakening in him, and it still wasn't clear what it was. His father, being very upset with Francis, chained him to the wall, because Francis kept going off into the mountains, and apparently, again, part of the awakening. And his father being upset with him and that he didn't want to be a knight, he didn't want to go back into war, and all the people were talking about him, chained him to the room in his room. His mother, being very, kind to him and felt bad about it, would constantly unchain him and let him go. But then he would go either into the mountains or into the town, and he started giving the clothes off his back to these poor people. And then his father brought him into the store and wanted him to work in the store with him. But one day, a bunch of priests came into the store. He wound up giving the priests all the cloths that they wanted to make their clothing. And his father was enraged with this, that he would do such a thing. So that sent him back off again. Chained him again to his room. Mother again, let him go back up into the mountains. And he kept telling the friends and the people in the town that he was very embarrassed by his son. Francis escaped several times with the help of his mother, and he went down to the church one day in San Damiano. San Damiano is down at the foot of Assisi, and he started praying in the church there, and he saw a vision of Jesus Christ. And then he heard Jesus say, quote, "Francis, repair my house. As you can see, it is in disrepair." However, Francis believed that he meant to physically repair the house, the church he was in. So he proceeded to start repairing not only that church, but several other churches in the town. Well, that's not what Jesus wanted, but it was good anyway, because he did keep the churches going. Jesus really meant the religions itself needed to be revamped. With his father finding out about this, he was enraged and incensed at Francis' behavior and called upon the Bishop of Assisi to intervene. You want it now? Go ahead. I'll tell you about the bishop.
You can tell when you're trying to actually practice the outline. Sorry.
Well, I understand that Francis and Claire had the same problem.
Yes.
Yeah, she did.
Sharing the microphone.
Yeah, she did.
And unfortunately, we don't
We
have
didn't
enough
go
time to get
into
into Claire, but she's another interesting story.
Another program.
That's
Another program, yes.
That's another talk.
That's another talk. And we want to try to be timely with this one, and if we have to cut some things out, then unfortunately, so be it. But we're going to try to get through. So one of the things that Paul and I had talked about a lot was the example of when he was a knight and a womanizer, and when he had the conversion. That for us, it really spoke to us about the power of our own story. Again, our individual scares and how illusion, even when you, as we know, Baba told us, that Francis became perfect, realized a perfect master. He became this by the end of his life. So that what we talked about a lot is that if even a perfect master in the end of the life can be this little, crazy guy in his youth, it's like, hey, if he can transform, I can do it too, We talk a lot about, we've gained courage from him, that we can get so quick to get into, I'll never make it, I'm not good enough, blah, blah, blah. But we never know the threads, that Baba has to weave through our life. And it's given us great hope. And also that we noticed that St. Francis, he just forgave himself for these things. He didn't hang around wringing his hands for 5 lifetimes going, oh, I'm such a bad person, blah, blah, blah. He really kind of quickly, maybe he did some penance, we don't know, but it didn't keep him stuck. And so that gives us a lot of hope about that we also can just forgive ourselves of any crazy things we've done in our past, and that the morning and the dawn is a new day with Baba every day. And it also brings our attention, we talk a lot about, back to gratitude. And although, we can't say we're on the scale of St. Francis, but we feel so blessed by Baba's grace. And what a big player grace is in awakening. That's another thing we've learned through him. Without Baba's grace, I don't know where I would be, and probably everybody here may say the same thing. And so we are blessed because we have Baba's grace. He's graced us with allowing us to know who he is, and what a big relief that is in our life, that we have somebody to lean on. We're dependent on that divine grace. And I love the title of Darwin Shaw's book, Effort and Grace, because so many times Paul and I don't, and Paul talk about, those are the 2 things, if you had to put it on the head of a pen, what do we really need to do in spiritual life? We often talk about effort and grace. You take 1 step toward Baba and he takes 10 toward you. And these aren't new things to all of you Baba lovers. Most of you I can see, I know most of you, we've been around the block a long time. And we know these things, but St. Francis, because we read Baba or Francis every day, brings this home to us again and again, through his example of his life. The thing that we've talked about that really helped us in our own transformation around the Father chaining him and escaping and the San Damiano. When Francis, when the cross spoke to him, and he kind of didn't get the message right the first time around. He started to rebuild the church with his hands and all of that. And I could relate to that because I remember being an early Baba lover, and it took me a long time myself to understand that what Baba was telling me didn't have to be literal, but it was sometimes symbolic, and that he had his own way and his own language. And when I became more aware of that and more confident in that, it really changed me, in a way that gave me more confidence that Baba was there. Expanded my faith, I guess I would say. And that even, again, Francis, being a man, listen, he got God realization that way, but even he didn't get it in the beginning. So I thought, listen, if he didn't get it, I should be lighting up on myself, that I don't get some things right away either. When Paul talked about, well, he didn't. Did you talk about the bishop? No.
No, you interrupted me.
Back to the bishop.
Well, the bit with the bishop was, like I said, his father wanted to try and get the bishop to talk some sense into his son. And instead, that backfired. He brought him into the town square and basically embarrassing him in front of all the people in the town square. And he turned it right around on him and he said, well, I'm divorcing my parents and want nothing to do with them. I don't even want the clothes on my back. Proceeded to take all his clothes off, stood naked in the middle of the town square. The bishop came down off his perch there and took his robe off and covered his naked body. That was just about it with Francis and his father. And then he decided to go into the mountains and in hiding. His father did try and find him and did send out people looking for him, but he hid in all kinds of different places, sometimes in a little tiny cave, just big enough to fit him in it, and right in one of the mountains, not far from one of the other, I forget which one it was one of the other churches. Huh? Anyway, that was what happened with the bishop.
So, like I said earlier, we all had our share of drama in life. Francis had family dysfunction, like many of us. That actually helps us again because through his example. One of the things I personally really got from this, from Francis, was that, you know, you can't be dependent on the good opinion of others, and sometimes we have to make a little bit of a stand. And Paul and I have talked a lot about that the act that Francis did of stripping himself really was not about defiance. It was really about a proclamation to himself and the world at that point that he needed to rely on nobody but God. And certainly as a Bible lover, I myself have had to stumble along with, faith and my depth of faith, and knowing that Baba tells us, give everything to me, everything. We can't both worry about it. And this story we've talked about a lot because it kind of showed us a new way, And to have that kind of faith is really something that I salute him. So now Paul's going to talk a little bit about the connection to St. Francis and nature and preaching to the wolf, because of course we know that he was the patron saint of animals, and he's well known for a couple of things. And one of them, of course, is the animals and preaching to the animals.
I left out one thing about with the bishop. Let me read that. Get it right. When the bishop came down and put the robe around him, what he did was an act by Francis was not an act of defiance, but really an act of proclamation. The shift that I think was that he needed total reliance on God for everything. And that's the way we should all think. And I can attest to it now that I rely on him and him totally now. I leave everything to him and let him decide what the outcome should be. Now, Francis should know he was a nature lover. He went off into the mountains all the time, and if he couldn't find people to preach to, he started preaching to the animals. And it was, he loved God's creation so much, the way God loved it, and the beauty that God has made in this world. And these are things that we take for granted. Some of you people have been to my house. We look at the beautiful trees and garden and the pond and everything, and you just wonder how wonderful God is and how type A he is, that he wants everything that way. And I'm married to a type A, so I know. And we take it for granted, and he saw that, Francis. And so he loved to preach to the animals, and it inspired these animals to, and that's what Francis was. That's it. Now, you want the wolf? Okay. Okay, as you know, he's known as the patron saint of animals. This came to happen because of something happened with the wolf of Gubbio. The wolf was terrorizing the town and the people and the livestock, killing the livestock of the people in Gubbio. So Francis decided to take a trip up into the mountain to find the wolf. And he did. He spoke to the wolf, then brought the wolf down to the town and told the townspeople to feed the wolf every day, and it will not kill any more animals or terrorize them. The people did exactly what he told them, and that wolf never did anything else wrong again.
And they have a statue of the wolf outside of Gubbio.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ann, that's right. We don't want to make it too long, but one of the things that this speaks very deeply to me, because those of you that know me know that I'm a great horse lover. And so I so relate to Francis, but not on the level he did, and I'm in awe of it, because I know a lot of you have dogs, and a lot of you, we know about Caesar Milan, the dog whisperer. And when we learn lots about being around horses in the beginning, natural horsemanship is about understanding and meeting animals where they are and loving them where they are. And when I see how long it's taken me, I could have 9 or 10 more lifetimes and not know everything there is to know about connecting with these amazing beasts that I love. But the little bit I have learned in my 60-some years of being around them is that when we understand their language and we meet them where they are, this is how we do natural horsemanship. And I often wonder when I'm out every day or whenever with the horses in the pasture, I think about Francis and the depth of communication that he had with his own horses and how much he respected them. And this has actually helped me to be a better horsewoman. Hold on, just give me a second here.
The leper rhino.
Yes, thank you, Paul. The next thing, just one other story, and then we're going to move on a little bit here. Francis was also so much known for his work with the lepers, and so I'm going to let you, Paul, tell you the story about the lepers, and then.
Francis was riding his donkey into town, and he came, we'd been to the leper colony there in Assisi, and it's on the way into town, so you can't avoid it. And as he was riding into town, he saw a leper. And he knew he was repulsed by the lepers and didn't want any part of them. And he felt that he needed to get over this aversion. He proceeded to get off his donkey, walked over to the leper, and he kissed him on the lips. Now that's a leap of faith. That really is a leap of faith.
Do you
And
believe
then-
that was the moment he was God realized? Because
No.
I've read that story. Many,
No.
supposedly that
No.
leper was
I don't have that information as that when he got God realized. I wouldn't doubt that could be, because then God would have said, okay, he's taken that leap of faith.
I have read the story that
Really?
the leper transformed at that moment. Now, I don't, and of course, the incredible, because he hated lepers.
Yes.
I mean, he didn't
Cult
just.
by them.
He
despised
hated
him.
them.
He did.
He tested them.
He despised
And it took an overweening amount of will to do what he did.
Right.
And I believe, I've read the story, that the leper became Christ for him. And at that moment when he kissed him, which would certainly be a very good moment for God
Yeah.
realization.
Yeah.
I don't know, but that's always been my interpretation
I can
of
be.
that story.
I agree. Unfortunately, I wasn't there, but I wish
No,
I was.
no,
I'm okay.
if it happened, we were there, we probably wouldn't have known what was happening.
Right.
I just wanted to respond then, is there are 2 write-ups, I'll show you where they are later in Lord Mayor, I have them. So it's possible, according to Baba, it's a little confusing, I'll show you where it is so you can look it up for yourself, that it could have happened when he got the stigmata, and there was one other time that something happened, and my memory is not serving me well, but I'll show you where that is. Is that good for you? Okay. Were you done about the leper?
When he was canonized, was that because of the stigmata?
No.
No?
No, he was canonized as a saint
But
because
there's
of
gonna be
what
a
he had
miracle.
done his whole life, not just the stigmata. Because I believe, being a perfect master, he could have made those stigmatas if he wanted to. That's what I felt. So I'm thinking, the stigmata was only 2 years before he died. So I'm believing he was already, a perfect master. He could have made these on himself, just by who he was, as a perfect master.
But why
Usually
would
they
he
don't
do
do
that,
that.
though? That would be for show.
Yeah, they wouldn't do that. He
No,
wouldn't.
I understand, but he did it, because they say, okay, God did it, but he's a perfect master, he could have done
No,
anything.
that's true, that
Mayor
is
Button
God.
said he only lived 2 more years after God's realization.
Right.
Well, that
Right,
probably
that's
is
it.
the
He
time.
only
That's
lived
why
2 more
we
years.
think it's the time,
There's
but we cannot
stigmata, and
verify
then
that
2
for
years later,
real.
he died.
Because Baba did say that he received God realization at the end of his life, so that would speak to us that it would probably be during the time, around that time, the stigmata. So let's move on so that we can try to fit everything in for you folks today. One of the things that, of course, is the big thing with St. Francis was his charity. And the Franciscan orders around the world, that's their big focus, is on charity. And charity, one of the biggest things that I learned from Francis about charity, I sort of had a light bulb moment once about it, was that it was just not about giving physical things, that he had no consideration for cost of self, that real charity, that's what it is. If he saw someone that needed shoes, he took his shoes off immediately. He didn't stop and think about it, like I might stop and say, well, can I really afford to give these shoes away? Do I have anything else? What do I have that doesn't have holes in it? There was no thought. They had reached a place of so much love and service that it became an automatic reaction to him. And I began to think about that charity is also just, that charity just isn't about physical things, that it's about being willing to forgive is one of the biggest acts of selfless service and charity that we can give our brothers and sisters in the world, all of humanity. Forgiveness, trying to be better spiritual people, just trying to really work. All of those things that we all know, you didn't need us to tell you, you know yourself, Baba talks about these things, what pleases him. And that really, somehow Baba wanted me to see through Francis, for me personally, that's also the biggest act, is whenever we have an act of self-sacrifice, like I may not want to agree with Paul, but I have to meet him halfway, or something, the smallest little things. And when Baba talks about, giving a smile to somebody on the street who's downtrodden, it doesn't have to be big acts that we're out doing things. It's how we are sort of conducting our life. And that my family, and people that I meet will get the benefit if I work on myself. And so that's also an act of selfless service. And I kind of learned that from Francis. In short, just very little about, he started this brotherhood, and of course we have skipped a lot of things because we just don't have time to go over everything today. So we tried to pick some big things about his life that we felt would give you sort of a flavor of who he was. But one of the other things, of course, he had established this brotherhood. And very interesting about, well, how did he treat these brothers? And, after reading about it, it would seem to us, it was very much like being in the circle around Baba, and that he held his brothers to high standards, and also like Baba talked very much about that real love for God is never proselytizing. It is being in the world and acting in a way that makes others kind of want to stand up and say, well, what is this about? Or, what sets your heart on fire? That kind of thing. In other words, he exhibited real love, not talked about it. So he talked about that. So he had a commonality there with Mayor Baba there. I also just really wanted quick, and then we'll move on to the Baba part of it, because I think this gives the flavor. This is a very quick prayer that St. Francis wrote, and the brothers used. And I think it really tells, I feel like Baba himself could have written it. That it's like a different way of writing some of the other things that Baba wrote. So you can see how it's, there's so much of a likeness and a crossover between Baba and St. Francis. And it goes like this. Your will be done on earth as in heaven, that we may love you with our whole heart, Baba, by always thinking of you with our whole soul, by always desiring you with our whole mind, by always directing all our attention to you, and by seeking your glory in everything. With all our strength, by exerting all of our energies and affections of body and soul in service of your love and of nothing else. And we may love our neighbor as ourselves, in drawing them to all your love with our whole strength, by rejoicing in the good of others as in our own, by suffering with others at their misfortunes, and by giving offense to no one. Jai Baba. Amen. So that was the flavor of kind of what went on in the Brotherhood. Of course, a lot of charity and a lot of giving. It was all about giving. The last piece of bread went away. There was no thought of eating for oneself. Or a piece of clothing if you're cold, then it just went away automatically. Nobody stopped to think about it. You know, is this my last coat? You know, will I be cold? Should I give it? It was just an automatic response of love. So that's pretty amazing. So now, I want to move on and talk a little bit. Yes, I also want to mention that I felt that that really Mayor St. Francis had such a fine, uninstructed caliber of love for God. He really was a stellar Baba lover. And this is why, again, it calls me personally to him as an example of how to try to move through my life. So let's go on and talk a little bit about the cave in Assisi, because that's really where there was this crossover, you know. Baba, as you know, had a very big meeting in Assisi, and I'm going to, instead of using my own words, which would be wrong to do since we actually have the words right here of Lord Mayor, if you'll indulge me, I just want to read a few paragraphs about Mayor Baba's trip to Assisi, and what he said about that, and what happened there at that cave. This is out of Lord Mayor. Of course, if you look, you could probably find other references. And maybe know a few. One of the reasons for Baba's trip was that he wished to remain in seclusion for 24 hours somewhere in Italy, and chose Assisi for the purpose because of his association with St. Francis. Baba asked Herbert, meaning Herbert Davy, there on August 132, in search of a cave for the seclusion. In the meantime, Baba visited some places, I won't go into all of them, in Italy. So Kitty arranged for a car to drive Baba to Assisi, and this trip was started at midnight on the 5th. In a small 5-seat Fiat, and it arrived late and ended up leaving at 2:30 a.m. Saturday, August 6th. Accompanying Baba were Chanji, Kaka, Quentin Todd, and Signor, I don't know if I pronounce this right, is it right, Pavisi? He was the proprietor of the villa who was doing the driving. And they had, of course, loads of luggage. Baba had not had a moment's rest until they departed. There were instructions he had given each in the group. He called all into his room before he left and told them to stay awake near him. With a faraway look in his eyes, he lay down with his hands gestured carefully in the air. When his fingers moved like this, he had once explained, he was putting his seal on an order. Baba had explained to those present that before he could do his work in Assisi, one of two things would happen. Either there would be a storm, or I shall be ill. True to his word, Baba suffered from stomach pain, which made him quite restless throughout the night, and he rolled on the bed from side to side in anguish. Inexplicable is the Avatar's suffering. Age observed. How can we stand how he suffers for the universe? His lover's eyes filled with tears upon seeing their beloved suffer. Baba's pain increased, and he remarked, "The pain I am bearing is like that of a mother about to give birth. The expression of Baba's face reminded them of the poignant paintings they had seen of Jesus suffering on the cross. Some of them cried out, "Baba, transfer some of your pain to us. Let us suffer for you." But only the Avatar can bear such pain, which he does for the whole creation. Yet this longing from their hearts pleased him, and feeling their love eased the acuteness of his suffering. Baba's pain gradually decreased during the drive to Assisi, but Quintin and Chanji became ill. During the drive, twice an accident was averted by Baba's grace. Arriving in Pisa in the morning on the 6th, they refreshed themselves at the, I think it's Netion Hotel. Starting out again, they passed the Leaning Tower of Pisa. At about 2 in the afternoon, they reached Siena, where they ate lunch. Cacus slipped on the sidewalk and was at first thought to have incurred a serious injury, but he was not severely hurt. Sorry. They arrived in Assisi at 5 p.m. and were met by Herbert, who had found an actual cave used by St. Francis outside the town of Mount Sebastian. There were other caves in the hill, but Herbert had covered this particular cave with branches to recognize it again and prevent others from invading it. He had been instructed to meditate in it prior to Baba's arrival for 4 days daily and 8 hours on the day preceding Baba's arrival. After a light meal at 6:30 p.m., they left for the cave, covering quite a distance by car and ascending the remainder on foot with some difficulty. Leading the way, Herbert guided them to the spot at 7:30. The sun was setting and the birds were headed toward their nests. Baba was to immediately enter the cave. Before doing so, he instructed his companions not to look at him, and above all, not to touch him. Baba carried a prayer rosary of St. Francis inside with him. It was settled that Chanji and Herbert would keep night watch outside the cave, and Kaka and Quentin would relieve them in the morning. Baba had ordered Kaka and Quentin to return to town and go to the Catholic Mass in the crypt of the Basilica of St. Francis at 7 a.m. and kiss the tomb of St. Francis before coming back to the cave by 9 o'clock. Signor Pavasi was to watch over their belongings. The others were ordered not to eat. The fast was to be broken when Baba emerged from the cave. At midnight, Chanji and Herbert made tea for Baba and placed it near the cave's entrance. The next morning, Sunday, August 7, Kaka and Quentin went to the cave to stand watch at 10 o'clock. Chanji and Herbert went back to the hotel to rest. Near noon, Quentin heard a sound and, forgetting Baba's warning, looked toward the cave. Inside, he saw Baba facing the sun, with his eyes closed and making strange sounds. What a wonderful vibration filled the air. Remembering Baba's order, Quentin quickly glanced away. At noon, everything was still. Then, at 1 o'clock, Baba clapped, and Kaka and Quentin removed the branches from in front of the cave. Baba directed Kaka to go to Assisi and informed Chanji and Herbert to come at 4:30 p.m. Coming out of the cave, Baba ordered Quentin not to come near him or to touch him. With Quentin trailing behind, Baba roamed from the hillsides for half an hour before re-entering the cave. The summer day was quite hot, and the air was still. Kaka, Chanji, and Herbert came at 4:30. An hour later, according to the instructions, Quentin called out to Baba. Baba stepped out and seemingly dazed, as though he were unaware of his body. After a few moments, Baba stepped toward them and gestured, "How lucky you are that you were the first to speak to me after this seclusion." Baba then called them to the cave and explained. Spiritually, a big meeting of spiritual personages took place here, the likes of which has never been held before. And we read in other places that this conglomeration of folks that were there were, of course, all this high saints, masters, agents, even the hierarchy of the angels were present here. I said perfect master. It is due to the greatest upheaval that is coming for the world. It will be the greatest upheaval of all times. It was decided in this meeting that I will manifest as my original real self and speak next Friday, vast changes everywhere will follow. My circle, which is already formed, will realize me. Their duties will commence in different directions, and the changes all over will cause an upheaval in the world which has never been experienced, as the greatest spiritual revolution of all times takes place. It goes on and talks about a lot of things, and I'll let you read yourself. And if you want to know where it is, I'll be happy to show it to you. But what I really wanted to talk about was what happened after Baba left the cave too. Again, I'm going to give you the brief on it because we get too lengthy here. He did have a duty. He came out of the cave, and he asked them to gather some wood. He picked up twigs and rocks, had them collect twigs and rocks from inside the cave, and he asked one of them, I don't remember which one, that this should be taken back to Assisi, to India with them. He also had a duty lit. We don't know what that was about, but he had the ashes collected and instructed that the ashes should also go back to India. And as a side note of interest, Valeria, who most of you know about, who's really kind of a touchstone person there in Italy, the ashes have gone back to her. Mondley put them back in her hands because they felt they should go back to Assisi. So all of this is sort of being worked upon about how to keep these sacred ashes safe and where their final resting place should be. So that's just an interesting side note of that. Baba came out and he was so intoxicated that Herbert and Chanji, the men, had to help carry him down the hill. It was like an intoxication, a god intoxication. And so he walked all the way from the cave, and it's quite a long distance. Paul and I have walked, it's quite a distance, and Ian, who'd been there, it's quite a distance down the hill. And he went into town and he went to several places, and one of them was the front of Brother Bernardo, one of St. Francis's brother, his place where he had residence at one point. I'm not sure if it was his childhood, but it was his residence. And Baba sat down on a stone in front of that home and said, and began to weep. Baba wept. Baba said, this is where Francis sat and wept for the love of Jesus. And it so moved us because if you can move the avatar, to weep, it had to be a poignant moment for these men who were with them at the time. So we can only say about Assisi several things, and I'm going to look at a few pictures. We spent a lot of time in Assisi because, for whatever reason, our divine design is part of our personal journey. We go to Assisi a lot, as people know. We're going with some people like Anne, who have been there before, taking a few people, because people over the years have asked us, how to get to the cave. It's not that easy to find, where are all these places? So Baba sort of set us up and has us sort of helping people along to make these pilgrimages over there. And that's what we do. And so what I can say about Assisi is that Christians and Babalars alike who have been there will all tell you that they use the word magical. It's a magical place. And I think that divine inspiration we talk about is so important on our journey that, we're human and we get tired, and to be inspired, to be really inspired, moves us along much easily, than if we just kind of have to bump along and, when we get a moment of inspiration, it's like a real jolt forward, we want to keep moving. And Assisi offers, we can only share with you, such I will just say that the divine wine flows in abundance in Assisi to those who are open, with an open heart there. The love of Meher Baba and St. Francis are very much still present in Assisi. And this is why we continue to go and help other people to take the pilgrimage. Yeah. I think in closing that all I really want to say is that thank you for coming to share this part of our lives with you. And we hope that it will inspire you a little bit too. And if you ever want to go to Assisi, let us go. We'd love to help you with any questions you may have about making that journey. You certainly won't be disappointed if you take a trip to Assisi. And I think I'd just like to close by again just saying, Lord, make us all an instrument of thy peace. Thank you for coming, and Jai Baba.
Amen.
And we'll show a few pictures.
We have a
Just
couple
few.
of pictures of us.
And it's a close-up, of course, the Franciscan cross is here. This is the cross of San Damiano, Paul, is that what it's called? The
Yeah,
cross?
that's the San Damiano cross.
Just a point of interest I wanted to point out, just an interesting fact. It is inside the cave. It is inside the cave, maybe the first or second time that we went to the cave, is what we found.
The cave is taken care of by the Benedictines
Yes.
up there, and they constantly go in there and clean out the
Clean it
cave.
out.
The first time we went in there were letters all over the place, pictures of Baba, the candles set up and everything. The second time we went, these two things were all that was left, and a set of rosary beads.
And we did leave a couple more. But, anyway, I don't hate to divert, but I think it's a point of interest that I don't know, it's the one I have on if you want to see it later. But the interesting thing that Francis made, can you see it on here? The cross is not the typical cross of Jesus where he's hanging and slumping and it's so sad and so, so horrible. He's dying on the cross and he's hanging down. And you see, the Franciscan cross, this is St. Francis design, is that he's upright. And it sort of speaks to us about that really, that maybe the message of that is that it's about the resurrection and that there is joy in everything, even in being crucified. I don't know what, I guess I'm looking inside the cave.
Right.
This is how small the cave is. It's very small. We'll show you a picture of the outside in a
Only
moment.
2 people can fit in that cave.
Yeah.
It looks bigger there, but it's really not that big.
This is the outside of the cave. And as you can see, it's sort of built into the side of the rock on the mountain. And it's a little bit in disrepair right now, and it is a bit treacherous to get there. It's not that easy to find either. That's why if you want to go, talk to us and we'll give you a better map than the one we were given to find. Some people have gone and never found it.
When,
But
when,
Go ahead.
when we were there the first and second time, if you walk this way, you're going down the mountain.
This is totally
I mean,
off.
you're down a 100-foot drop down the mountain. So Jen and I put all these rocks all the way around to try and protect the area. We cleaned it up. We spent about 4 hours there cleaning it up and cleaning the inside of the cave.
So we call it the best kept secret in Assisi. Because
Right.
God himself came to this place and is it millions? I thought I read that millions of people pilgrimage to Assisi every year. Not just Catholics, but people from all around come to make this pilgrimage. Now this doesn't get a lot of traffic. That's kept secret. God himself came here. It doesn't get any better than that, right? How lucky are we? How lucky are we to know these things, Okay. This is another one of the outside.
That's
What is
the
that?
Tau cross. That's what I'm wearing here. St. Francis designed that cross to represent his order. And when you get professed after doing the 2 years, you get the Tau cross.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you.